Welcome to the Motor Asha podcast. Now, we know there's a lot of people who actually want to take their bikes to a track day. What are the things that you need to consider before you pack your bike, transport it from a mechanical perspective? This podcast, we address that. We've called Zain from Zenngine, who's going to tell us exactly what are the things that you need to be looking at before that bike is transported. The other thing that we also wanted to address to Zain was when you bring the bike back, what is the maintenance schedule that is required and how different is it to a regular maintenance that you do?
Hello everyone, this is Zain Sayed from the Zenngine, back again with another Motor Show podcast. Today I'm going to talk about track day maintenance, where I'll discuss how do we prepare a motorcycle for an upcoming track day and how do we maintain it after it comes back. So before I start, I would just like to mention a small disclaimer that I'm not going to be discussing your general service items which you should be doing while you're riding on the road as well. I'm going to talk about what do we do above and beyond those general service items. So the first thing that I would like to mention is there are, in my mind, different types and levels of riders at the racetrack. I have broadly categorized them into three categories. The first type are the first timers who are going to the track for the first time. They are probably going to be with a school. They are probably going to follow trainers around for a long time. And that means that they are not going to be pushing the extremes of their motorcycles limits on the racetrack for the first time. The other extreme of this are the third type, who are veterans at the racetrack, who've been doing this for a very long time, who probably compete in some sort of racing competition, and they have a dedicated team who is working on their motorcycle, setting it up for them, and they don't really need to worry about the maintenance. That leaves the second category, which includes myself, which is people who have been to a couple of track days, slightly more track days, who are not competing, who are not fighting for every last tenth of lap times. They are there to have fun. They are there to improve their riding skills, and they are there to get better. Why this is important is because based on what category you fall in decides how much you're going to push your motorcycle on the track, and that in turn decides how strict of a maintenance schedule you need to follow. So we'll first talk about the first type of riders, right? These are first timers, like I said, they are not going to be pushing the extremes of the motorcycle, which means that they need a very basic maintenance and preparation before and after a track day, right? The first thing for preparation is that they need to make sure that they are not a hazard for other people and the racetrack itself. A couple of examples can be one, you cannot have loose nuts and bolts on your motorcycle or loose parts like guards or panels or lights or something which may fall off on the racetrack and hit someone who's coming from behind you. So that's a big safety hazard that cannot be on your motorcycle. You cannot have any part of your motorcycle which is already or which may in the future leak oil or any sort of fluid on the racetrack. That is a big no-no. If I give you an example, if you are abroad and you go to an international racetrack, before they let you out on the circuit, they are going to go through your whole motorcycle and make sure everything is proper before you are allowed to go onto the racetrack. So it is very important to do that. Indian racetracks are not that strict, which is good enough for us if we make sure that these maintenance are done properly. Apart from this hazard situation, we need to make sure that our bikes are in good running shape so that we can enjoy on the racetrack, right? But since this is the first type of people, they are not really going to be putting a lot of wear on the engine. You again need to be very basic with this. You need to have a general checkup of your motorcycle. That can be done by a service center, that can be done by the guy who maintains your motorcycle. Preferably, it should be someone who works a little bit with track machines so he knows what the bike is going to go through. But the general rule that I like to follow is Every consumable part of your motorcycle, including all the fluids, should have at least 70 to 80% life left in it if it is not brand new. That is a general rule that I follow. A lot of people ask me that, I'm going to the track for the first time. Do I need, really sporty tires? Do I need, slick tires? Or, are these tires going to work? Or, do I need to turn my lights off? And do I need to take the mirrors off? And etc. etc. If you're going for a level one training, most schools will not be very picky about what tires you have, and or your tail lights are on, or your headlights are on, or your mirrors are on or not on. And these things do make a difference, and they are very strict with these on international tracks. But on Indian tracks, they are not very picky about all of this, right? What you need to be focusing on is whatever tire I have, even if it is a sport adventure tire, whatever tire I have should have a good amount of life left in it. A very sporty tire that has 20% life left is much worse than an adventure tire which has 100% life left. So that is something, that is a rule that I like to follow. Whatever you do, whatever your bike's condition is, make sure that it is not a hazard, it is not going to create a problem. Two, whatever parts you have on your motorcycle, whatever consumables you have, make sure they have decent amount of life left in them. Now we come to the second type of riders, including myself. Now these are people who are at the racetrack to have a lot of fun, who have done quite a few trainings with them. Now here is when the maintenance and preparation gets even more important, because now it's not just about safety. It's not just about not falling anymore. It is about getting better. How you get better, what is your betterment criteria is up to you. You can be better at lap times, you can be better at riding technique, you can get better at having more fun. That is all up to you. But the point is that we are there to get better. For me, getting better comes from having confidence. If you have confidence in your motorcycle, you can pull out better lap times, you can have more fun, you can learn new techniques, and so on and so forth. Confidence comes from consistency. If your motorcycle and yourself perform consistently, similarly, every time you are at the racetrack, you are going to build confidence. On the other hand, if you go to the racetrack every time and your motorcycle behaves differently than it did last time, you are going to spend that track day learning your motorcycle, building your confidence up again, and you wasted your track day where you could have spent time learning something new. That is why maintenance gets very important, so that you have a consistent motorcycle every time you go to the racetrack and it feels exactly the same when you are on it. I personally follow a checklist before I go to every track day that I do with my motorcycle, and that is what I'm going to share with you people now. So we start from the front of the motorcycles. The tires that I run on my motorcycle, doesn't matter how sporty they are, doesn't matter if they're slicks or super puffers or what, since I'm not shaving every 1/10 of a second on every lap, they don't matter to me. But what does matter is my tires should have at least 70% life left in them if they're not brand new. Why 70%? Because any tire, whichever I have used on the track, the last 20 to 30% of the tire does not inspire any confidence in you on the racetrack compared to the other 70%. Right? On the road, they will be perfectly fine because you're not going to be pushing the limits of your motorcycle. But on the racetrack, the last 20 to 30% don't inspire a lot of confidence. So they should be at least 70% or brand new. The next thing is brakes. Brakes is something which is very subjective because different riders have different levels and aggression of braking and different techniques of braking, which really changes the wear pattern of the brake pads and the brake rotors and so on and so forth. I would just like to mention that every time you go, make sure you have enough life left in your discs and your brake pads before you go to the racetrack. It is not essential to have a track compound brake pad or a track disc to go to a racetrack. You can just go with your normal brake pads, normal discs. The worst thing that is going to happen is they're going to fade a little bit and you will get a little bit of, you lose a little bit of feedback. That is it. You just slow down a little bit, let the brakes cool, and they will be back to normal again. Yes, if you want to extract every last tenth of a lap time, then yes, you need to think about upgrades. But track day upgrades are going to be a whole podcast on its own someday. Next thing, which is very important for me that I do, is I change my brake fluid every time I go to the racetrack. Brake fluid is something which is very important for me personally because I am very aggressive on my brakes, and a little bit of old brake fluid drastically changes the feedback on the brakes for me. My track days are 3 to 4 months apart. I do 3 to 4 track days a year. They're 3 to 4 months apart, and that is enough time for my brake fluid to wear down enough for me to be able to notice the difference. So every time I go to the racetrack, I make sure that I change my brake fluid. Now we come to other oils in your motorcycle, which will include your engine oil, which will include your fork oil, which will include if there are any other hydraulic components that you have on your motorcycle, like a hydraulic clutch or something like that. The one thing which is important to remember is that track miles or track kilometers are not at all equal to road miles or road kilometers. Why is that? Is because when you are riding on the road, unless and until you are, really gunning it, most of your track mile kilometers are pretty calm, pretty relaxed, especially if you consider the engine, If on my Daytona, I have a 14,000 red line, but I am not gunning it 14,000 every time for every second on the road. I am most probably cruising at around 6, 8, max, maybe 10,000 RPM. That is what I am doing on the road. But when I am at the racetrack, every single second that I'm on the throttle, I am trying to open it more and more and reach full throttle. And every gear, I am redlining it to 14,000 RPM before I change my gear. That is my engine being going through its very extreme full performance mode, right? Yes, it is designed to do that, but the service intervals are not given for track usage. The service interval given on your manuals are done for majority of the people who use it for the road mainly and occasionally on the racetrack. Hence, it is a road motorcycle, not a track motorcycle, right? So track miles are not equal to road miles, which means your maintenance intervals come down drastically. I personally use premium engine oil from Maxima, the Extra 4 series, which have worked really well for me. And I personally flush my engine oil and put in fresh engine oil after every 2 track sessions. This is considering the fact that I do not ride my Daytona on the road. That is a track only motorcycle, which I only track and I do not ride it on the road. Even then, I change my engine oil after every second track session. And once I do that, I can see significant wear because the motorcycle is being pushed that much at the racetrack. The same thing applies to your fork oils. Usually, I would say, your fork oils, they would last you around 10 to 15,000 kilometers, after which they would start to diminish, and you would feel the difference in handling and so on and so forth, depending on what fork you have. But on the racetrack, the same thing I do with my forks. Every other track day, I am flushing my fork oil, putting in fresh fork oil, whether it is Maxima, whether it is Liqui Moly, whatever it is, putting it up to spec so that every time I go to the racetrack, the feedback that I get from my front tire, the feedback that I get from my front forks stays consistent as per last time, and I can focus on learning some new techniques rather than trying to figure out what my motorcycle is doing. This has to be applied to pretty much all liquids. The only liquid left is for me is coolant. I do 3 track days a year, not a lot. With that amount of mileage, I flush my coolant every year before summer. Summer is one of the hottest periods of the year. Whether I am riding it on the road or I am at the racetrack, it is really getting working the cooling system a lot harder. And when it is working it harder, I would like to have fresh coolant in my motorcycle, which is going to do a very good job of keeping the motorcycle in temperature. This is pretty much covers mostly everything on your motorcycle with regards to fluids, with regards to tires, with regards to brakes, and these are the only parts which get impacted on the track way more than other parts of your motorcycle. Your air filter is going to get dirty at the regular interval. Your chain sprocket is going to get worn down at regular interval, and these are going to be tested for at every basic service that you do, right? The one thing which is very important that you do before a track day, and this applies to even the first type of people, is that before every track day that you go on, you need to make sure that your motorcycle is torqued to spec from each and every small little bolt, whether it's a small engine casing bolt, it is a small brake reservoir bolt, it is a windscreen bolt, it is a fairing bolt, to as big as my engine mounting bolts, my engine internal bolts. If I'm feeling vibrations, I would go inside the engine, make sure everything is torqued to spec. So I would go to a workshop which has a torque wrench, make them go through the front to the back of my motorcycle, pay whatever is necessary to make sure that each and every nut bolt is fastened properly. The last thing you want on the racetrack is some nut bolt falling off, which can be a hazard, which can be a big hazard for you and for someone else who's coming behind you. So before every track day, I make sure everything is talked to spec. Now, I did mention that track miles are not equal to road miles, right? One, it brings down your service intervals because track miles have a much larger impact on your motorcycle. But now, what I'm trying to say is once you come back from the racetrack, right, you cannot use that motorcycle as it is on the road. You may be able to, but that needs to be confirmed. So once you are back from the racetrack, your motorcycle needs to be gone through with a fine tooth comb, front to back, to make sure everything is okay on that motorcycle before you continue riding it on the road. A track scenario puts a lot of stress through your motorcycle. It accelerates wear on a lot of parts of your motorcycle. It really pushes all the fluids on your motorcycle to the limit. So once you are back from the racetrack, you really need to make sure that your motorcycle is checked front to back to make sure that okay, this is now ready to be ridden on the road for the next, let's say, 10,000 kilometers, right? That is something which is very important. Those are basic pointers that I would point out to people who go on the racetrack, who are planning to go on the racetrack. And I hope that this information encourages a lot more people to go to your nearest racetrack and learn something new, because that is something which has enhanced my riding skills and completely changed the way I ride on the road. And not just me, a lot of people around me also. It has a big impact. So thank you all for listening, and I hope this encourages a lot more people to come to the racetrack. See you. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I want to hear your stories, your motorcycle experiences, what you've been doing, and how motorcycles have made your life better. So if you have something to say, DM us on Instagram, and I'll be more than happy to get you on this podcast.